If you want to use your life to make the world a better place, what career should you pursue? When I was a student, I was concerned by some of the big problems in the world: global poverty, climate change, gender inequality. So I wanted to know the answer to that question. I tried asking friends and family what I should do, tried going to the University Career Service, tried going online in order to get advice from websites. And one piece of advice that I just got over and over again was, want to make a difference? Work for a charity. But I never really found a rationale for that. It just seemed to people like that was the obvious advice. And I was thinking, look, this is the biggest decision in my life. This is a decision about how to spend over 80,000 working hours. I want to know that some really good evidence backs up that decision. And I realized that if I wanted an answer to that question that was really going to satisfy me, I was going to have to be a geek and do the research myself. Over the last 4 years, my colleagues and I have been investigating exactly that question. And we've come up with a framework that enables young people to help them make decisions about what career they should pursue if they want to really make a difference. And this research has led to some fairly big changes in my life. I've changed the focus of my research quite considerably. I've altered what I do in my spare time, dedicating that to social entrepreneurship. And I've changed what I do with my money, committing to donate at least 50% of what I earn over the course of my life. So here's the framework. You should think about two different aspects when you're considering a job that makes a difference. The first is the impact you'll have on that job, like while you're working in that particular position. But the second is how that job sets you up to have a big impact later on in your life. Let's go through each in turn. So there's 3 different ways in which you can have an impact on the job. The first, and that's the most obvious, is just the labor that you contribute in your role. So when we think about moral heroes like Mother Teresa, or kind of common sense do-gooding careers like working as a school teacher or in the charity sector or as a firefighter, that's because people are directly contributing their labor to a good cause. But that's not the only way you can have an impact in a job. You can also have an impact indirectly, for example, through your ability to advocate for important causes. One of my favorite examples of this is the eradication of smallpox. I think that this is one of humanity's greatest ever achievement. Since we eradicated smallpox in 1980, we've saved 122 million lives and counting. That's more lives that have been saved than if we'd achieved world peace in that time period. And the person who normally gets all the praise and the accolades is called Donald Henderson. He's the person who led the campaign. And he certainly did terrific work. But someone who's almost entirely neglected in history is called Viktor Zhdanov. He was a minister of health for the USSR, and he lobbied the World Health Organization in the 50s. He was the one that actually convinced the World Health Organization to take on eradication as a program, an idea that was unheard of at the time. And if it wasn't for him using his platform, his ability to influence other people to make a difference, perhaps the eradication program would have never gone ahead. So that's one indirect way in which you can make a difference. A third way is through your ability to donate. The most famous example of someone doing good through their donations nowadays is Bill Gates. You wouldn't think, if you really wanted to make a difference in your life, that you'd work in computing. You certainly wouldn't think to develop an operating system like Windows. But Bill Gates has been able to earn enough that, by my estimation, by the time he dies, he'll have donated $100 billion. And because he's using those donations so wisely, targeting effective causes within global health, I estimate he'll save upwards of 5 million lives. To put that into context, that's as if he'd saved the life of everyone in my home country of Scotland. So it's pretty astonishing. Now, that's the direct impact you can have in the job. But there's also, when you think about pursuing a particular job, how that job can set you up to have an impact later on in your life. And when you're just starting out, you're coming out of university, this is a much more important consideration. The amount of time you'll spend in later jobs is far, far greater than the amount of time you'll spend in your first couple of jobs. And moreover, you'll be much more influential in those positions. That's the time later on in life when you're running an organization, let's say, rather than merely interning for one. So when you're setting out, the most important thing is to pick jobs and ways to work that set you up to have an impact later on. Within that, again, I think there are 3 things to think about. The first is how this job contributes to what I call your career capital. That means your skills, the network you build, how this job functions as a credential. The second is how this job keeps your options open. Is it opening doors or is it closing them? And then the final consideration is how much you're learning in the course of that job, both about yourself, what areas you can potentially excel at, but also about what the world needs. Now, using this framework, kind of listing all the most important considerations about having an impact in a particular job, what does the argument for working in the charity sector straight out of university look like? Well, surprisingly, it doesn't look so strong. Firstly, let's just think about the direct impact you have. And I think when most people advise to, say, make a difference, work in the charity sector, they're thinking that's because you'll have a big impact on the job. Even here, it's not so clear. So if you want to make a really big difference, then you want to be in a position where you have a really large influence over the world. But in the world as it is today, it's not really the charity world that has the big influence compared to places like politics or the world of business or entrepreneurship and innovation. Now, you might think people in these positions currently don't use that influence for good ends, but that just shows that we need to have more altruistic people entering those positions so they can use that power for good. The second aspect concerns effectiveness of charities. Different charities we've found vary massively in how they're able to use resources to benefit people. With different charities, even within those that are very effective, able to provide 100 or 1,000 times the benefit with the same amount of resources, benefiting 100 times as many people. What's more, when different social programs have been tested, and these are social programs that have been rolled out very widely, it's found that 75% of them actually have no effect at all. And this is crucial when you're thinking about what work to do, because charity work's very competitive, so it's very difficult only to work for the very most effective charities, the ones that are making the biggest difference. So that's impact on the job. When we look at the kind of other considerations, again, the picture doesn't get much better. So your ability to advocate within the charity world isn't as good as it might be in other professions where you have a bigger public platform. You won't be earning very much, so it'll be harder to do a lot of good with your donations. But even more importantly is how this work will set you up to make a difference later on in your life. And charities, because they're so much more resource constrained than for-profits, for example, they just can't give you the same sort of training that you can get in the for-profit world. So the skills that you'll develop just generally aren't as good in the non-profit world as they are in the for-profit world. If you think about keeping your options open, well, it's much easier to move from a for-profit company to a non-profit than it is the other way around. So if you start off working in the for-profit sphere, then you've got a wider array of options than you would if you worked straight for the charity. Final consideration is how much you'll learn in the course of that. And that will, of course, vary from person to person. But I think if you're already interested in working in the charity sector, you probably have at least a reasonable sense of what that's like, both how rewarding that can be, but also some of the struggles involved in that. In contrast, very few people, when they come out of university, have a really good sense of what it's like to work in operations or sales and marketing or in management. And so you could potentially learn a lot more working for something, even if you think that won't be your long-term career path. So given this framework, working for the charity straight out of university, I think, often isn't the best thing to do. Sometimes it can be, but I think that's the exception rather than the rule. If so, what's better? Well, I'll mention 5 paths that I think are really potentially very high impact and I would really strongly encourage people to think about. The first one is entrepreneurship, both non-profit and for-profit, but I'll focus on for-profit. So entrepreneurship is incredibly socially valuable in general. Economists have estimated how much social value gets generated by innovative companies. And they've found that for every pound an innovative company creates in profit, it generates 50 pounds of social value. So even just by creating things that are kind of useful and get taken up, you're making the world a lot better. But even better than that are the ways that entrepreneurship does in these other criteria. So one is in terms of if you have a kind of long-term success, then you'll potentially earn a lot of money that you can use to donate effectively. Also, entrepreneurs more and more getting seen as thought leaders, potentially giving you a public platform to advocate from. The most compelling reason, though, is how this builds your skills. So perhaps beyond any other sort of first career path, I think entrepreneurship is amazing in terms of building your skills. You have to learn an awful large number of different things. You have to be the marketer, you have to be a manager, you have to be an operations person all at once. And because there's such pressure, you have to learn those things very quickly. Moreover, because you're getting such a wide variety, you're really learning a lot about where you can really excel at. So an example of someone in the community of people we've advised is the delightfully named Lincoln Quirk. And he set up a company called Wave. And that company makes it easier and cheaper for immigrants in the US to send remittances back to their home country. And this is potentially a really huge deal. Remittances globally amount to almost $500 billion. That's several times the total foreign aid flow. If he can consistently make those transfers cheaper, then he's potentially increasing the amount of money that goes to some of the poorest countries in the world by several $100 million. A second path that I think is potentially very high impact is going into research. So if you look through assessments of the most influential people over the course of human history, scientists, innovators, thinkers very often top those lists. And that makes sense. Again, this is something that's significantly undersupplied by the market, and I think by governments too. And if you can focus your research on a really high impact area, you can potentially have a really outsized impact. So an example of this in the modern era is Norman Borlaug. He was a fairly regular guy from Iowa, but he had this one obsession, which was to develop this short stem, disease-resistant wheat. Very boring innovation, it sounds like, but it radically increased crop yields. And that precipitated the Green Revolution, such that when Norman Borlaug was awarded the Nobel Prize, the committee estimated that he'd saved 1 billion lives. Now, even if you think that's hyperbole, it's undoubtedly true that the amount of good he's done is certainly in the order of significantly improving the lives of millions of people. Another example of someone in our community who's pursued this path is Eva Vivolt. She's now a postdoctoral researcher at New York University. And she's already making significant contributions to our understanding of the use of randomized controlled trials in development. That is applying the scientific method to development in order that we can ensure that we're really helping people and helping them as effectively as we can. Third potentially high impact path is politics. We advised one person from Oxford, Laura Brown, who we thought might be a good fit for the political arena. And again, if you think about the most influential people in history and the most influential people today, political leaders are very often up there. So you've got Abraham Lincoln and Winston Churchill and Aung San Suu Kyi and so on. And what we found is that in terms of the ability to actually enter politics, it's incredibly skewed depending on your background. We actually worked out that for some Oxford students, the chance of you being able to become an MP if you try to do so is as high as 1 in 3. And that represents some astonishing facts about social mobility in the UK. But for someone like Laura, who's idealistic and really wants to make a difference, and does come from that sort of background, studying politics, philosophy, and economics at Oxford, it's an amazing opportunity to do good, potentially influencing how billions of dollars are spent in government spending and legislation that can have an impact on a global scale. Also, if she isn't successful, isn't able to enter government, still potential to do important advocacy work or to have a big impact through the policy world or through think tanks. Fourth option is what I call skill building. So you might think, I just have no idea what I want to do long term. Well, if so, that's fine. Instead, what you can think is, I'm just going to focus on the next 5 years, the next 10 years, and deliberately do things that can build my skills, build who I am as a person, so that I can be the sort of person that the world really needs. Habiba Islam is someone we advised, again from Oxford, who pursued this. She was thinking maybe politics long term, but she wasn't sure. And so she's entered consulting, which is this great all-purpose business education, and provides a great credential, so that she's in a good position while she works out her options, perhaps over the next 5 years. keeps a lot of doors open such that she can pursue something high impact later on. And she's also able to make a really significant impact through her donations at the same time. That takes us to the final path that I think people should think about quite seriously when thinking about how to do good, and I call that earning to give. Now, for some people, their comparative advantage, what they're particularly good at, isn't things related to things that can directly have an impact, but it's rather ability to take careers that are very lucrative so they can earn a lot of money, like Bill Gates did. Through that, you can donate a large proportion of your earnings to the most effective charities and have an impact through your donations, even if not through other means. So Alexander Gordon Brown was a graduate of here in Cambridge, and his particular skills lay in maths. And that means he's been able to work in trading in the City of London. After just a couple of years, he's been able to donate well over £100,000. He's planning to give over 50% of his income over the course of his life, which will amount to many millions of pounds. Again, because money is so flexible, he's able to target that only to the very most effective charities. And that means that his money will be able to do enough to significantly improve the lives of tens of thousands of people. In the world today, I think talent is far too often squandered. I think there's too many altruistic people who want to make a difference, hear this advice, oh, work in a non-profit then, and think that's not for me, so I guess I should just give up on my altruistic aims. I think there's too many other people as well who stick it out and say, okay, well, I will work for the non-profit then. And they do so even though they could have had an even bigger impact elsewhere. We each have 80,000 hours of working time that we can spend in our lives. I think that if we follow the research and are very careful and think in a careful manner about how to spend those hours, I believe we can have an absolutely extraordinary impact.